Hello, Sunday School teachers, preachers, and students. Welcome to SundaySchoolPreacher.com. In this week's Sunday School lesson, the Chronicler writes to show us David's gratitude and how we can have a heart filled with gratitude. The Chronicler writes an encouragement for the children of Israel to keep hope alive. It's important for the Chronicler to help this nation understand that even though they've been defeated and taken captive in the past, that the future is still bright with God on their side. The Chronicler wants the Hebrew nation to know that God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God of King David and King Solomon is their God, and they are God's people. He wants them to know that even though their forbears fell into sin and were punished, God has not forsaken them. They've been through great pain and distress, and now they want to know their place in this universe. Now that they're back in Jerusalem, they want to know if the same God that brought King David to power and King Solomon to great splendor is still their God. The Chronicler gives them a history lesson that shows the greatness of God and the great blessings of God when God's people live in obedience. Some of the ideas surrounding this week's text include the terms gratitude and psalm. So last week I learned that Pastor Rodney Jones's mother is now at home with her Savior. His YouTube channel is called Rodney Jones, and many of you have probably seen his excellent presentation of the weekly Sunday school lesson. I'm saying this simply to say that you only get one biological mother. Pastor Jones is a leader in this community, and I hope that you'll show him some love over the next few days and weeks as he and his family now live without the presence of their loved one. You can show him some love at www.paypal.me/Elder Rodney Jones. Again, he faithfully does this work week in, and week out. I hope that you'll join me and let him know that his work across the years is noticed and you just want to be a source of encouragement for him. Now, wherever you are in the world, thank you for subscribing to this channel. I love to hear where you're listening from and your thoughts on the lesson in the comments below. If you subscribe to this channel and click the notifications bell, you'll be notified as soon as I upload the next lesson. Plus, that lets YouTube know that you like this channel and they'll promote it more. So the more people that subscribe, comment, and click the like button, the more people will be able to reach across the United States and the world. So if you have Wi-Fi in your church Sunday school classroom or wherever you share this lesson, this channel is a good way to teach and discuss this week's lesson. What I provide is a concise overview of background, context, characters, themes, and topics that gets to the point, saves you time, and enhances your own teaching and study. If that's what you're looking for, you're in the right place. But the only way I know this is helpful is if you subscribe, click the like button, or say so in the comments. And if you want to support this channel, I accept correspondence and gifts at 1590 Jonesboro Road Southeast, Box 150032, Atlanta, Georgia 30315. So with that said, welcome again to SundaySchoolPreacher.com, and let's go to work. First, we'll look at the background for today's text. And as I noted last week, most scholars agree that 1st and 2nd Chronicles were originally one book. Last week, I explained how this book was originally named The Events of the Days, was later named The Things Omitted, and then finally named 1st and 2nd Chronicles by the translator of the 4th century Latin Vulgate. What I did not mention last week are the theological themes that continually reappear in this text. New Interpreter Study Bible notes that these three themes are the concern for the continuity with the past. That's the concern for continuity with the past, a concern for all Israel, and the third theme is the chronicler retains from Samuel and Kings the concept of retributive justice. So the concern for continuity is perhaps the most important of these three themes. Chronicles is written after the children of Israel have been defeated, exiled, and then returned to Jerusalem. Chronicles is written to the post-exilic community, and that's those who remain or have come back after the exile to Babylon. The NISB notes, following the Persian defeat of the Babylonians under Cyrus the Great in 539 BCE, the Israelites have returned from Babylon to live under Persian rule in Jerusalem and worship in the rebuilt temple. Dr. Renita J. Weems writes in the Africana Bible, reading Israel's scriptures from Africa and the African diaspora, that the writer creates a narrative. She's talking about the chronicler. The writer creates a narrative that instills a sense of mission, national pride, and divine purpose in a people that had once been displaced from their homeland and robbed of their cultural memories. Dr. Weems continues, the chronicler was eager to inspire the inhabitants of Judah to hope again and to throw themselves behind a national effort to rebuild and to restore order to their homeland. So it's important for the chronicler to help this nation understand that even though they've been defeated and taken captive in the past, that their future is still bright with God on their side. I think the one verse that captures the image, that image more than any other one, is 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sin, and heal their land. The chronicler wants the Hebrew nation to know that God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God of King David and King Solomon is their God, and they are God's people. The chronicler wants them to know that even though their forbears fell into sin and were punished, that God is still their God. The NISB explains, instead of asking, why did this happen to us? They want to know about their relationship with the past. Who are we? Are we still God's people? What do God's promises to David and Solomon mean for us today? So these are a people who have suffered and endured great pain and distress. They no longer rule themselves. They've been ruled by the Babylonians, and now they're ruled by the Persians. They need answers about their place in the universe, and the chronicler writes to help them understand their relationship with their painful past and their present God. This 16th chapter of 1 Chronicles deals with the Ark of the Covenant of God placed in the tent David prepared for it, and David's Psalm of Thanksgiving. This chapter is the conclusion of the chronicler's Ark narrative, and it institutes public worship for the nation of Israel. Additionally, the NISB notes that David's Psalm of Thanksgiving quotes portions of Psalm 105 and Psalm 106. Some important words to consider from this text include gratitude and psalm. So the review of last week and how it connects to this week. In last week's lesson, King David worshiped God in Jerusalem in ways that had never been done before. David's worship was heartfelt and sincere. He had built luxurious houses for himself in the city of Jerusalem, and he wanted the Ark of God in Jerusalem also. David wanted to honor God. He was determined to get the Ark of God in Jerusalem so Israel could worship God with the symbolic presence of God in their midst. David gave the Levites specific instructions. He told them to bring singers, musicians, trumpets, harps, lyres, and cymbals. David was going to have a grand celebration. He was going to honor God, and he was going to worship God with all Israel joining him in a great and grand celebration of thanksgiving and praise. Last week I quoted Townsend Commentary and Westminster Dictionary of Theological Terms, noting that the city of David was originally known as Zion, or Jerusalem, and that Zion is used in the Old Testament for all or part of Jerusalem. I noted how carrying the Ark of God was the responsibility of the Levites, and David had already learned from his first attempt to bring the Ark to Jerusalem that the rules have not changed. God had not changed God's mind about who was to minister to God. Verse 16 gave us an idea of the kinds of instruments that would be used, along with singers, all from the Levites. There would be singers playing on musical instruments. There would be harps, lyres, and cymbals to raise loud sounds of joy. This was going to be a grand celebration worthy of the occasion. The lesson then skipped to verse 25. In verse 25, David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of thousands went to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with rejoicing. I noted how David included the elders of Israel. He was king and he had absolute authority, but he did not neglect the elders, nor did he neglect the leaders of his military. This was a celebration for all of Israel. Verses 28 and 29a closed last week's lesson with a description of how they brought the ark up. It was with shouting to the sound of the horn, trumpets, cymbals, and loud music on harps and lyres. You get the idea that David really outdid himself with this celebration. Not only did David intend to honor God by bringing the ark to Jerusalem, he intended to worship God with a great celebration in the process. This week's lesson continues last week's with the Ark of the Covenant of God, now placed in the tent that David had prepared for it. Townsend and Boyd's commentary titled this week's lesson, A Heart Filled with Gratitude. Standard Lesson Commentary titles this week's lesson, David's Gratitude. The scripture text comes from 1 Chronicles, the 16th chapter, verses 8 through 12, and then skips through to verses 19 through 27. I'll read that text for you now from the New Revised Standard Version. We begin with the section entitled David's Psalm of Thanksgiving. Give thanks unto the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people. Sing unto him, sing psalms unto him, talk ye of all his wondrous works. Glory ye in his holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face continually. Remember his marvelous works that he hath done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth. And then we skip to verse 19. When ye were but few, even a few, and strangers in it, and when they went from nation to nation and from one kingdom to another people, he suffered no man to do them wrong. Yea, he reproved kings for their sakes, saying, touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Sing unto the Lord, all the earth. Show forth from day to day his salvation. Declare his glory among the heathen, his marvelous works among all nations. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He also is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Glory and honor are in his presence. Strength and gladness are in his place. So what takes place in this passage? The lesson opens at verse 8 with David's Psalm of Thanksgiving. Westminster's Dictionary of Theological Terms defines psalm as a hymn, sacred song, or poem. The book of Psalms, or the Psalter, is composed of 150 religious poems of prayer and praise of ancient Israel, arranged in 5 books. Verse 8 begins by exhorting these recently returned people to give thanks, to call on God's name, and to make known God's deeds among the people. After going through what they had gone through, the chronicler reminds them of how King David gave thanks and called on God. The point for us is to know that when God has been good to you, you ought to tell somebody. These people had been hurt and defeated, but now they're brought back to Jerusalem, and somebody ought to praise God for it. Verse 9 continues with, sing psalms unto God. Talk of all God's wondrous works. These are action words. Praising God is active, whether singing loud, with a loud voice, or a quiet praise. But more so, when we begin to talk about the wondrous works that God has done for us, praise just happens. Verses 10 and 11 tell us to glory in God's name, to rejoice and to seek the Lord. In these first 4 verses, I see a lot of glory, a lot of rejoicing, a lot of seeking God. This is a clear example of a grateful heart. David's Psalm of Thanksgiving flows from a grateful heart. Verse 12 tells us to remember God's marvelous works, God's wonders and the judgments of God's mouth. It's good to remember. It's good to remember what God has done for you. It's good to remember how God brought you through. It's good to remember when and where God delivered you. Remembering the mighty and marvelous works of God in our own lives leads us to a grateful heart and a thankful praise. In verses 19, 20, and 21, David's psalm reminds the people that the children of Israel didn't start out as a mighty and strong nation. They came from humble beginnings. From those humble beginnings, with the help of God, they grew into a mighty nation that King David once ruled. In verse 12, the psalm told them to remember. Now in these verses, the psalm tells them what to remember. Verse 22, just like verses 19 through 21, is a word-for-word quote from Psalm 105, verses 12 through 15. Verse 21 is a verse I've often heard quoted, referring to preachers and other ministers of God. Touch not mine anointed and do my prophet no harm does not mean every preacher or minister is above criticism or even condemnation when they're outside of God's will. In other words, this verse is not a get out of jail free card for preachers or ministers who are in the wrong. Verse 23 elevates the praise from personal to all the earth. Psalm 24:1 reminds us, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. It tells us to proclaim God's salvation. This verse tells us to proclaim God's salvation day after day. In other words, never forget how God delivered you. Verses 24 and 25 declare that God is great and greatly to be praised. In other words, a great God deserves a great praise. And a great praise will tell the saints and the sinners alike what God has done. Everybody ought to know that God has been good, that God has delivered, and that God is great above all other gods. Verses 26 and 27 close the lesson with David's psalm of thanksgiving, reminding the people that idol gods are essentially useless. Idol worshippers can talk, but God worshippers can point to the heavens and the earth to declare that God is the one true God. It's their God who has made the heavens and the earth, and this God deserves all the glory and all the honor. So let's give the text some context. Townsend commentary defines the Hebrew word for rejoice as being glad. It's associated with dancing, singing, clapping, playing, and external movement consistent with festival celebrations. In other words, rejoice is party language. At first glance, I found the description of party language a bit amusing. But I had to ask myself why. Parties aren't inherently bad, and it's great that God's people know how to party in the Lord. A heart filled with gratitude should lead us to want to party for the Lord. Key characters in the text, of course, King David, the central figure, as he conquers the city of Jerusalem and builds a place to keep the Ark of the Covenant. A quote from Townsend. Key words, not necessarily in the text, but good for discussion, is gratitude. Gratitude is the response to God and God's blessings that is an expression of God's praise and devotion. In the Christian context, believers respond in gratitude for the indescribable gift. Check 2 Corinthians 9, verse 19. The indescribable gift of Jesus Christ, who is the supreme expression of God's grace. Psalm is another key word. And of course, we've already defined psalm as a hymn, sacred song, or poem. And the book of Psalms consists of 150 religious poems of prayer and praise of ancient Israel, arranged in 5 books. Themes, topics, discussion, or sermon preparation ideas. One might be: a great God deserves a great praise. And then a question you might ask your listeners. Remembering what God has done for you is important. Do you remember a time when mother or father couldn't do it, but God did? I know I do. Concluding thought. The chronicler writes to encourage the children of Israel to keep hope alive. They've been through great pain and distress, and now they want to know if God is still on their side. Now that they're back in Jerusalem, they want to know if the same God that brought King David to power and King Solomon to great splendor is still their God. The chronicler gives them a history lesson that shows the greatness of God and the great blessings of God when God's people live in obedience. The same God who reassured the broken and defeated people of Israel back then is here to reassure us today. And a preview of next week's lesson. The lesson for December 15th continues just as last week's lesson by going to the very next chapter in Chronicles. Next week in chapter 17 and chapter 21, I'll consider the chronicler's description of the roles of the prophet Nathan and King David as David desires to build a temple for God. Public worship has already been instituted, and now David believes the people need a temple to worship God that's worthy of God's greatness. The lesson is titled Building God's House and David's House. The text is taken from 1 Chronicles, the 17th chapter, verse 1 and 3 through 4, and then 11 through 14, and then skips to chapter 21, verse 18, and then 21 through 27. If you want to support this channel, I accept correspondence and gifts at 1590 Jonesboro Road, Southeast, Box 150032, Atlanta, Georgia 30315. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I am Reverend Dexter Alexander, and you've been listening to SundaySchoolPreacher.com. The only way I know this is helpful is if you subscribe, click the like button, or say so in the comments. Please also click the notifications bell so you'll be notified as soon as I upload next week's lesson. And if you don't mind, please share this site with other Sunday school teachers, preachers, and students. Thank you, and may God bless you real good.